What disaster is so powerful it unleashes a chain of mass pandemics, economic meltdowns, and violent food riots, all at the same time? The answer may shock you, but preparing for this means you're 100% shielded against anything Mother Nature, God, or the evil of man may throw at you. Fellow patriot, my name is Alec Deacon, and in this shocking video presentation I'm going to expose the 21st century apocalypse, a threat so powerful it will wipe out 281 million Americans in the first year. And while NASA, the CIA, and the Pentagon are warning us like crazy, no mainstream TV or radio outlet is talking about it. Sounds unbelievable? Then keep watching, because by the end of the video you'll witness undeniable proof that this mother of all catastrophes is coming in the next 12 to 13 months, and it will turn America into a third world country. And if you believe you're prepared for any cataclysm, here's the terrifying truth. Most of your preps, like your stockpile and home protection system, will be useless if you don't prepare for this devastating disaster. What's even worse, Obama and the hotshot crooks are ignoring this threat and do nothing to help us, even though they know it will kill millions. In fact, just seconds after this calamity hits, all social structures will be reversed, and the information I'm about to disclose will put you at the top of the food chain. There's nothing you and I can do to stop it, but there is an answer, and if you stick with me until the end of this presentation, you'll meet one weird professor who's uncovered a proven way to shield yourself, your loved ones, and even your community from America's morbid coming mayhem. But first, who am I to make this kind of dark prophecy? Like I said, my name is Alec Deacon. I'm the author of the bestseller Backyard Liberty and editor of Survivopedia.com. I've published articles seen on SHTFplan.com, MyFamilySurvivalPlan.com, and of course, Survivopedia. I spent almost 2 decades studying every last type of survival situation, and I am specialized in rural and wilderness survival. I know everything there is to know about bugging out, farming, supply stacking, home protection, you name it. And in the last couple of years I dedicated my time to help anyone to survive any kind of disaster. But even more important, I'm a loving husband and father and a devoted Christian. I spent most of my life to making sure my family is 100% secure no matter what. I want them to be safe and know exactly what to do in case of an emergency or if, God forbid, anything goes wrong. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I love to prepare for the worst, and each year I find myself more prepared both in knowledge and materials. But not too long ago, I realized I was preparing for the wrong things the entire time. What I discovered trashed all my years of experience in a heartbeat. It turned all my preps and knowledge into dust. It made me feel like a naive infant. I recently came across shocking news about an untold catastrophe set to wipe out our entire country. At first, I thought it was just a conspiracy theory, or at least a once-in-a-million-year event. But I was dead wrong, and what I saw sent shivers down my spine. Here's what it's all about. NASA has been issuing warnings about this for years. They're called solar flares. Solar flares are a space weather phenomenon. There's a certain period of the solar cycle when the sun is experiencing violent activity, and this causes massive explosions, pretty much like hurricane season on the sun. Occasionally, large cones of solar energy are projected into space, and if they hit our atmosphere, they cause EMPs. An EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, is an electromagnetic discharge that fries sensitive circuits within minutes, even seconds. Most modern-day appliances, the gadgets we use daily, and even the U.S. power grid all have sensitive circuits built in. Think of a normal blackout when you don't have any lights, heating, or internet. Only an EMP blackout is permanent and on a larger scale. This means you can also say goodbye to telecommunications, transportation, and even utilities like water. That's why NASA fears solar flares might send us back to the Middle Ages, and they fear that it will happen this year. However, solar flares are not the really scary part. I'll reveal in a few minutes how a hushed-up danger, closely related to these flares and proven to happen in the next 13 months, will wipe out the entire power grid network in the blink of an eye. But before I get to that, you first need to understand just how dangerous solar flares are. You see, I used to think solar flares were harmless and only happen once in a million years, but I couldn't be more wrong. Weird as it might sound, solar storms are the real deal, with the worst ones happening when the population wasn't so dependent on electricity. There were no iPhones, no internet, not even life support systems. There were barely any cars. In 1859, Richard C. Carrington, a British scientist, observed and recorded the largest solar storm known up to date. Even though back then the population was about 7 times smaller and didn't rely on electricity almost at all, the solar storm's effects were obvious even to the naked eye. Skies all over planet Earth erupted in red, green, and purple auroras so brilliant that newspapers could be read as easily as in daylight. Spark discharges shocked telegraph operators and set the telegraph paper on fire. Imagine how a solar storm would affect us now. We would basically be sent back to the dark ages because we're so accustomed to having everything at our fingertips. Just look at what happened in 1989 in Canada when a tiny geomagnetic storm collapsed Quebec's electricity transmission system. The power network went offline in less than 90 seconds, leaving the city in complete darkness without any power for 9 hours. This 1989 solar flare will seem like a rehearsal compared to what's about to come. That's because, according to NASA, in 2014 and 2015, the sun will reach its peak activity. This means that there's a huge chance we'll experience the devastating effects of a massive EMP. A NASA simulation study reveals that will happen in our high-tech modern society in the event of a solar storm like the one from 1859. The conclusion was that nothing is immune to solar flares. Everything from communication, transportation, and even water management relies on electricity, which means they will be wiped out. Electricity is like the heart of the human body. When it stops pumping, everything shuts down. Your TV, laptop, fridge, your oven, cell phones, kitchen appliances, and the radio will be useless. GPS navigation, banking, and transportation, all your utilities, including gas, electricity, and water, would cease to work anymore. Power outages would be followed by nationwide blackouts, radio silence, and satellite breakdowns, leaving the world in total chaos. Imagine not having any electricity for days, weeks, months, or even years. No lights, no communication channels, no water, no refrigeration, no navigation systems, no gas pumping, no food transportation, no waste pumping or garbage collecting. No one in our country can survive something like this. During an EMP, civilization will be sent back to the Middle Ages and most people won't be able to cope. Imagine the smartphone generation forced to live like cavemen. But as dangerous as solar flares are, that's not what sends panic through the U.S. military, NASA, and the entire Department of Defense. Solar flares are just the tip of the iceberg. There's a threat much more likely to happen, an event with even more catastrophic impact, ready to send our country into collapse at any moment. The mother of all EMPs could come from right here on Earth, something set to bring countries to their knees, an EMP bomb, a man-made device that causes an explosion which replicates the effects of a solar flare. But before I explain how, you'll first need to realize just how fragile our power grid is. People were panicking when the stock and bonds system was downgraded to an A-. Imagine what would happen if people only knew our nation's power grid is rated a D+. NASA knows, that's why they shiver at the thought of a solar flare. America relies on an electric grid based on 1880s systems. It's so bad it could give out at any moment without an EMP attack. In 2011 alone, there were 3,071 blackouts in the U.S. That amounts to 85 days of blackouts, while the average duration of a blackout is 3.5 hours. Just think of how often the power goes out in California or New York, and that's without an EMP. So in just a few years, the power grid might be overwhelmed by national demands. And here's the really scary part. This may sound unbelievable, but building an EMP device is not expensive or difficult. A small EMP device that fries your cell phone can be built with just a few bucks, some batteries, and spare parts you can find in a camera. Even 12-year-olds build EMP devices for science projects. There's no need for fancy technologies or billion-dollar investments to make it, and all it takes is not 100, not even 50, but just one warhead to be detonated above the U.S., and the effects would be irreversible. HEMP stands for High Altitude Electromagnetic Pulse. It's an EMP device that can be strategically detonated at an altitude of 20 miles above the surface of our country that will permanently cripple our power grid. And let's face it, the U.S. hasn't exactly been making friends over the past decades. North Korea, Iran, Russia, Afghanistan, China, all the enemies we've been making back since World War II have the power to detonate an HEMP over U.S. soil. And as if HEMPs aren't easy enough to build, any kind of warhead can be easily bought on the black market, especially an HEMP device. In fact, it doesn't even have to be a country. The next Osama bin Laden or any kind of terrorist organization can easily do it. However, the real danger of an EMP is it could happen without any signs or warnings. Unlike an economic collapse that's more like boiling a frog, when we would finally figure out that an EMP has struck, it would be too late. Just imagine you're heading to the kitchen to have breakfast. Usually you hear noise on the background, TV, radio, anything. But today there's a deadly silence, and you felt something's a bit off. You go to the kitchen and your wife tells you she can't cook breakfast because there's no power. You then notice there's no lights. Probably just a normal blackout. You pour a bowl of cereal and start eating it. You're halfway through your breakfast, but then you notice your neighbors gathered outside in one big disoriented crowd. Probably the blackout affected most of the neighborhood. That's when one of your kids comes over to complain that the cell phone doesn't work. You explain that it can't be charged because of the blackout, but you check your phone and it doesn't work either. Maybe this isn't just a plain blackout. So you go outside to talk to your neighbors. All of them experienced the same crazy stuff as you did. One of them has a radio. You can hear something. There's been an EMP attack. No invasion, but the power grid is down indefinitely. This will be the last time you'll see your neighbors like this. You know you're prepared for anything, but the possibility of an EMP attack never occurred to you. This is not a drill. It's the real thing. A week later, you're knee-deep in hell. You now realize that you're underprepared at best. Your food and water supply are almost gone and you're freezing. Most of the food is rotten and the kids are scared and cold. You managed to protect your home so far, but in the last couple of days, riots have started. People are starting to turn on each other. They went from civil to psychotic in just a few moments. They're desperate. They need food, and you still have some. Across the street, you see fire spreading on your next-door neighbor's lawn. Looters are running the streets of your once peaceful neighborhood. You haven't seen any of your neighbors in weeks. You might have to leave your home if you want to survive. You heard rumors about people being shipped off to FEMA camps, but that's not the place for you. Soup lines for your entire family? Is that what it comes down to? One of your kids has a fever. The antibiotics don't seem to work that much. What should you do? And this is just the first few weeks. It'll take years to restore the grid. You may think the government's going to step in and it'll get better, but it gets even worse. An event so catastrophic will trigger a number of death